Welcome to my tapas style. So my menu is targeted at a pub. It has the idea of being centered around sharing food with your friends and your family, and therefore this lends to a tapas menu. So you order a selection of food for the table and people just eat what they want. Everyone shares instead of having individual meals for the individual people. There's also research to suggest that when you eat with family or friends, you will eat more food. This is because the high levels of social connectedness, which will increase your nostalgia and therefore increase the amount of food you eat. With customers eating more food, I'm going to make a higher profit. The influence for this menu came after researching into neurogastronomy and comfort food specifically. So comfort food increases the release of endorphins from our brain. Endorphins are a natural painkiller and therefore increase our mood by literally taking our pain away. Therefore, I wanted to base the dishes I made around comfort food. So this is my menu, as you can see. So I've tried to have a mix of seafood, duck, chicken, beef and vegetables in there to allow me to cater to a wide range of different dietary requirements. I've chosen the dishes on this menu because I feel like they're a mix between comfort food, but they can also easily be adapted to a tapas style. I would have liked to add a more traditional comfort food, sort of a stew or a soup on there. However, because it wouldn't be easy to eat or share as the items I've chosen, I didn't think it would be as appropriate. The target market for this would be families or groups of friends, and therefore I think the best location would be on the outskirts of Greater London in an urban area. This is because you would still have a high population density, however you wouldn't get a major footfall from commuters who are generally individuals, and therefore the patrons would go out their way to visit, and therefore you're more likely to get groups instead of individuals, which is who my menu is targeted at. This is backed up by the fact that 9 in 10 adults visit pubs, and therefore there's going to be a high percent of people who would consider coming. How the menu looks and the menu design is very important. So if a menu doesn't look appealing, then the customer is less likely to order from it. So as business owners, we can manipulate how our menu looks depending on what dishes we want to sell. Customers are more likely to order from the top or the bottom of the menu, and therefore we need to put our top selling dishes at either end. However, the golden triangle explains how customers read the menu. So they first look at the middle, they look then at the top right, and then finally at the top left. Combining both of these ideas, I've placed all my most profitable dishes in the top half of my menu to try and make the most amount of profit. You can also manipulate the words you use to influence customers' reactions. So words such as I've used for my arancini golden in the description will have a positive effect on customers, and therefore I'm hoping that this means that more people will order this dish. So I've used yellow as my main colour, as you can see. This is because it's a real happy and bright colour, and the whole comfort food rationale behind my menu is to increase people's mood and make them happier, and therefore I chose a colour that would reflect this idea. Adding to this, yellow stimulates the customer's appetite, and the more the customer's appetite is stimulated, the hungrier they're going to be, and therefore the more profit I'm going to make. Going on to the individual dishes now, I've tried to balance textures, flavours and smell within all the dishes on this menu, as well as within the menu itself. However, one of the balances I don't think I've got quite right is the appearance or the colour. So most comfort food on my menu is pancode or has pastry or bread as the main section or on the outside, and therefore the dishes have a real golden brown beige tint to them. I've tried to use different garnishes to brighten this up, so parsley, chives, parmesan each have quite a bright colour. However, I would need to look at this if the menu was to expand. One of the things I think is really important for a menu is to make sure you've got a balance between pasta, rice, vegetables, meat and fish as the stars of these dishes. So 94% of people generally eat pasta, so it's important that that is included in there. However, the value of rice has continually risen for 3 years. 55% of people eat vegetables for dinner, 73% of people eat meat, fish or eggs when eating out. All these are really high percentages, so it's important that we have a range of sort of main ingredients for these dishes to make sure that we're catering for as many people as we can. So the balance of textures, which is shown most within my mushroom arancini, I think. So it's got the risotto itself is soft and creamy. This is contrasted to the crunch of the panko on the outside, and then in the middle of the risotto, you've got that smoothness from the mozzarella. So as you bite into this arancini, you first can hear and taste through texture the crunch of that panko. You've got this creaminess of the risotto just behind it, and then finally you get a small hit of the smooth melted mozzarella from the middle. Having a range of tastes is really important, as not everyone enjoys the same food. So you've got a rich chicken bolognese, there's a cheesy bacon parcel, there's the fresh zing from the tomato of the bruschetta. However, I think the dish that shows this most would be the Yorkshire puddings filled with beef stroganoff. So the creamy stroganoff has a real meatiness. It's got a slight spice from the mustard, and this will contrast well with the nutmeg filled Yorkshire puddings. So nutmeg gives you a nice warm taste at the back of your throat, and that will really balance out the creaminess. And then you've got the slight spice from the mustards. All of these tastes will come together to make a really nice dish. When we talk about smell, we talk about orthonasal and retronasal smell. So retronasal is when you smell while eating something after you've began chewing it. And I think this is most shown within the lemon oil that's paired with the ciabatta. So the lemon itself won't be very strong when sniffed because you've got the oil, the ciabatta, the balsamic vinegar to overpower that. However, when you start eating it, I do think this citrus will come through. The smell of the bruschetta will give the customer a fresh, nice, summery tomato, garlic, basil smell, and that's your orthonasal smell there. It's very fresh and summery, as I've said, and therefore it will contrast really well with some of the heavier fried items on this menu. As you can see, I've completed an allergen matrix. So this shows that I have a range of food and that there is at least one dish for any given customer who has any of the main 14 allergens. I do only have one naturally gluten-free dish, and therefore I'd have to look at making some of the other dishes gluten-free to give a range for these customers. This is quite easily done for some dishes. So gluten-free flour I could just replace with the soft flour. So this would be the arancini or the onion ring. So the only flour that comes into it is when we're breadcrumbing it, and therefore I could buy gluten-free breadcrumbs and gluten-free flour to coat these balls of risotto. However, I would have to think about the cost implications. This would lower my gross profit margins, as gluten-free flour is more expensive than normal soft flour. There are 6 pescatarian and 4 vegetarian dishes to choose from, and I think that out of menu out of 10 items, this is a really good ratio. However, if I was to increase the amount of dishes, I would have to maintain this ratio. And as this is a menu, I've decided to price all the dishes at £3.50. I think this is a good idea because otherwise I would have a real range from the cheap to the most expensive dish, and therefore I don't think I'd get accurate representation of what people actually want and the profit I'd make, as they would most likely just order the cheaper end of the menu. In order to work out the gross profit margin, I worked out my cost and then my selling price, and then I divided my cost by my selling price, and this gave me my food cost price, which I needed to take away from 100 to work out my profit margin. So my puzzle dish was the one that is in fairly low demand but will give a high profit margin, and I think this would be my bacon wrapped mac and cheese. So the cost for this dish is 72p, but I'm going to sell it at £3.50, so my profit margin is 80%, which is really high. As far as my cash cow is concerned, this would be my onion rings. I have an 84% profit margin on them. They're really cheap to make, and I make the most amount of money from them. I think it's really important that my cash cow is a vegetarian dish. This means that I have a wider target market, and therefore the more people will order it, and therefore I can make an increased amount of profit. The star of the dish is a high money earner like the cash cow. It's in high demand and will have a high margin, and I think this is most likely to be bruschetta. The high margin of 67% is just above the industry standard, and I do think adding to this, a lot of people would order this dish, especially with other dishes, as it's quite, as I've said before, a fresh, different taste, texture and dish from the others. My loss leader would be my duck spring rolls for sure. These cost £7.34 to make, which is a high food cost price, and they have the highest loss percentage as well. So spring rolls are very popular, which I think would attract a lot of customers to buying from this menu, as they would see the spring rolls, want to order them, and therefore order other dishes as well. Having two more expensive dishes to make, like the spring rolls and the salmon en croûte, I do think will attract these customers in. They will think they're getting better food for their money, and therefore they're more likely to order from this menu altogether. The dish that is in high demand but would give me a low profit would be my calamari. So the profit margin is 12%, and I think that it would appeal to a lot of different people. However, it cost me £3.08 to make, and therefore only leaves me with a 32% profit for each one sold. However, it's quite an enticing dish, and therefore I think would be in high demand. As this is a tapas menu, I would offer a discount of buy 4 plates for £8. Although this would lose me some money originally, I do think that it would draw people in overall, because instead of ordering maybe 2 or 3 dishes, they would order that fourth, and therefore I'd make a higher profit altogether. I've also looked at 3 national pub chains. So I've looked at JD Wetherspoons, Michelin Butlers and Marston's. So in 2019, Wetherspoons made a revenue of £1,818.8 million, which included a 95.4% profit margin before the tax was added. In 2018, Marsden had a higher profit margin of 104 million before tax was added, and Michelin Butlers 2,152 million was spread across 1,750 assets. So I worked out how much this on average would mean that each pub was making, and it was around £1,229. This is a massive amount of money, and there's no way my pub would be making near this amount. One of the reasons for this would be it's a new business. It's just starting out. Doesn't have a great reputation, doesn't have a lot of any customers yet, therefore you don't have a large customer loyalty, and therefore you're looking to draw people in and not keep them where they are. Adding to this, I wouldn't have the reputation that these chains would, and therefore people coming across would have to take the risk as they don't know what to expect. On my next slide here, you can see I worked out for each of my dishes the cost of them, the selling price, which is always £3.50 as I've discussed, and therefore the profit percentage. Adding all these profit percentage up, I worked out that on average my gross profit would be 25%. This is a really low gross profit. However, I think because mine would be a really new business, I do think this is an acceptable margin to have. And obviously as the menu expanded and as the business expanded and grew customer base and reputation, I could look at increasing this gross profit by maybe either increasing prices, most likely increasing prices. I would need to work out the net profit. So in order to do this, I'd take my labour costs, which would be things for my staff mainly, so wages, uniform, and I would add that to my overheads, which would be the rent of the building, any bills I had to pay, any training I had to undertake, and I would add these two figures together. I'd take this away from the gross profit as a number, not as a percentage, and therefore I could work out my net profit. So this would be the money that I would be taking home each month or year, and that would be the full-on profit that I would make. In conclusion, there are 2 things that I would really like to change about this menu in the future. So the first would be I'd like to make it in season. So at the moment, as I've discussed, mine isn't. However, 46% of people said that they were interested in seasonal menus, and therefore I do think that this is an important bit to look at in order to attract more customers and therefore have a higher customer base. Adding to this, buying food in season is actually cheaper, and therefore it would decrease my food cost prices and increase my gross profit margins, because something like duck or salmon, where I make a loss in my gross profit individually, this would decrease. So I would possibly look at in season to making a profit on these dishes. Having a profit on all your dishes would be really useful, as it would mean that you can make more money, as opposed to some, like my duck and my salmon dish, subtract some money out of my gross profit, which is why I only have an average of 25% and not higher. The second thing would be to increase the amount of vegan options on the menu. At the moment there is only 2, and they both contain bread. This doesn't give a lot of variety for the vegans who would be attending my restaurant, and therefore I'd definitely look to increase this within the future and have more choices for them there. just the last page is my references, and thank you for listening.